I think I saw this like picture that described diversity, like kind of in a good way, where it was a carton full of eggs and all of the eggs were white and one was brown. And like, that's not really diversity. Like, diversity is like if it's a small egg and a large egg and like one that's like speckled.
Well, the problem was back in the old days, right? Like the gay characters and the trans characters, they were like murderers and serial killers and rapists and perverts. There was never actually any positive LGBT people.
Killing of Sister George. I saw that first in a movie. That was pretty heavy stuff, because this early lesbian stuff was not good, you know. People didn't come out alive often.
Trans people were always kind of represented as like a punchline or like a, you know, unsavory character. And like, you know, if you're feeling like you might be that, that's not good. To have drilled into your head growing up that like you're essentially a freak.
The first kind of like movie that I watched, and it's definitely not queer themed, but I take it as kind of queer. My nana, for I think it was my 5th birthday, bought me and my sister a cassette of Cinderella. But the thing that I was obsessed with that I think is queer was the fairy godmother. She was my favorite thing ever. The idea of someone coming in, saving you and turning you into like a princess was just, there was something transformative about it that like always stuck with me through my years and even into being a drag queen.
I remember watching The L Word as one of my first like queer shows that I really got into. Yeah, I feel like something that actually kind of stopped me from watching it fully or enjoying it fully was that it was a bit like white and middle class. And I mean, that's what Generation Q is kind of like attempted to fix and remedy. I thought it was like a little bit too much drama. I was like, wow, these people go through so much drama. If I watch this for too long, I'm going to incorporate this level of like betrayal, cheating, murder into my life, and I wasn't ready for that. So I've never finished The L Word. I've watched some of the new L Word, which I think is like a bit more chill.
I still don't like that in movie and film and TV world that 9 times out of 10 when they're showing a queer couple or a queer person, it's always like the stereotypes, like, you know, crazy color hair, crazy haircut, piercings, tattoos, or like they're really like sexualized.
I can't think of a specific example of when I would have first seen bi representation, because I probably put it in the back of my mind because it's never been terribly good. But that's until we've seen Heartstopper come out, Kit Connor's character, and it's just incredible to see a bi man coming out on screen, coming out to his mother, coming out to his friends. One of my favourite lines from the show, this is in season 2, he says, "I'm bi actually," about 20 times throughout the season, and it's quite funny. I say that so much in my life.
I can't remember the first gay character or whatever, but I remember watching Lady Hawk with Matthew Broderick in it and just going, I want you to be gay. I really want you to be gay.
Okay, first queer film that I watched. Oh, that's really hard. I'm trying to think of. I think the first one I actually watched was But I'm a Cheerleader. I thought it was like an authentic representation of the queer experience in the sense that like the main character is so like, I'm not gay, I'm a homosexual. What do you mean I'm a homosexual? And you know, it's a very campy, fun film. And I really enjoyed the way that it was like very tongue-in-cheek with like, you know, this is what it means to be gay.
I can't remember the first, and I don't actually know if I'm trying to think in my head, but a queer relationship that I saw in a movie kind of somewhat recently that like has had a bit of an impact on like, I watched it and I was like, wow, that was done really well, was in Buzz Lightyear, the recent one where the like general that's a woman's partner is a woman as well and they have a baby. And I liked how the whole storyline wasn't like, the storyline was about Buzz Lightyear and they still, you know, made the side characters queer and like made it very normal and chill. They didn't like, you know, make these characters like have crazy hair and piercings and like they didn't do that stereotype. They just like literally normalized it.
The Crying Game, I suppose. The Crying Game, even though it was authentic representation, it was still for shock value. But at least the trans person wasn't a serial killer or a murderer, I suppose, if I'm sort of trying to look on the bright side of everything.
Late at night, I don't know if anyone else remembers, they used to like screen Queer as Folk. Like, I can't remember what day of the night it was, but I would always sneak out of my room and go and watch it like with the volume on like 1 and be right up by the TV and just sort of like watch bits and pieces of it.
I remember we're going back quite a bit, I had one of those portable televisions. You know, it looks like a Game Boy and it has the antenna on it. And I remember, this sounds like a fake story, but it's true. Watching Queer as Folk on my little television in bed in the middle of the night, and that was my little step into seeing queer representation. But nothing I ever saw on TV or in the media represented who I was.
Yeah, I remember watching Queer as Folk and I thought, wow, like, you know, yes, gay men on TV, like, yeah, awesome, like, representation. But at the same time, like, I don't remember that show being very diverse. I think the biggest issue when you don't see queer people being represented is you start to think that they don't exist and you don't know much about what it's like being queer or being queer relationships without the representation.
I think the thing that I was like thrilled by was seeing men on men, or looking at men, lusting over men, or having conversations, or seeing intimacy with men on TV, which is so beyond. I never felt represented by it because I could never see myself in the mix because they were all white men.
I was on lots of different smaller YouTube channels because mainstream TV was really not giving. There weren't any stories that I loved or that I found like funny and relatable and wanted to binge that related directly to my experience. Not saying like all mainstream TV is bad, obviously there's awesome stuff, but it wasn't really like tapping into my identity as a queer person. There was this one YouTube series somebody made called The Wondrous Life of Caleb Gallo. It was really funny and kind of low budget, and the characters were really funny and relatable and more connecting to me than anything that was like on network television. It showed me that those are lives that I could lead, or people that I could meet, or situations I could find myself in.
Influence and power is very difficult to define, isn't it? Because, you know, what was considered influential and powerful 35 years ago would not be considered influential or powerful now. When you're discriminated against constantly, you know, I mean, a trans woman who has a job is considered influential and powerful, even if that job was, you know, a receptionist in a doctor's office. That was unbelievable in that time frame, you know, and she was considered to be the guru on what it was to pass and to have a job in society because all of us didn't.
I can't remember the first person of influence, but I remember the conversations around Neil Blewett, who was the health minister during the Hawke Keating period, somewhere there, and he was a mastermind behind the AIDS response in Australia. And I remember someone pointing out, saying, well, he's gay, and going, how do you know that? Where does that come from? And this was with hindsight kind of thing, and going, he's gay, and Dunstan, the ex-premier of South Australia, is gay. And I go, how do you know these things? They can't be, can they? They're not allowed to be. They're not allowed to be these things in public. They can't be in a place of power. They can't be making decisions. They're not allowed. And this sense of discord that was going on in my mind about actually gay men can be in positions of power and allowed to be was something really new to me.
Georgina Beyer, who was the first openly trans gender member of parliament in New Zealand. In 1995, she was appointed mayor of Charleston. I think it was Charleston in New Zealand. She was way beyond her time, and so the first openly trans member of parliament in any, across the world. There's footage of her walking down through a rally with Christian people, looking at everyone in the face and just staring them down for being so bigoted and hateful towards queer people and trans people.
And was Georgina openly trans?
Yeah, so she was openly trans, spoke about her journey when she was appointed mayor. She spoke about her journey to being trans, coming through prostitution, and her whole journey of creating a life for herself, as well as once she did establish what she was about, making sure she paid it forward and made efforts to look out for sex workers as well as queer people in New Zealand, and using her platform to advocate, and really acknowledge the trans community specifically in New Zealand. She was well respected, for the most part was respected because of her approach, because she was honest, she didn't lie about anything, and anything that anyone could exploit, nowadays with cancel culture, anything that she could have been cancelled for, she led in with the conversation and made it apparent, and sort of used it, to speak to the people that she represents, which was, the marginalized people within the minority groups. So what an amazing example.
I worked in a call center, and my senior manager was a gay Pacifica man. And he was amazing. He was such a big shot, and everybody listened to him, and it was so cool seeing this guy just run the floor, basically.
And how important was it seeing this person in a position of power?
I was used to seeing other queer people of colour maybe in positions like me, maybe in slightly elevated roles, but never senior management, and never higher than maybe a team leader. So it was really important to me to see that there is a future for us. We can go further than the average, we can go further than we think we can. Because I think sometimes you think because of your sexuality, because of your gender, because of your cultural background, it might hold you back from being able to achieve those things. But I really think that there should be spaces up there for us.
I can't think of one single person, one single role model.
What about someone who you saw as influential, or someone who was a leader? We had
collectives in those days, no leaders. Leaders, no. There would have been perhaps some writers, poets who would step up in rallies, and so that you could associate them with some kind of leadership role, but the idea of leaders was terribly patriarchal and very women's liberation at that time.
I actually really struggle to think about queer people in positions of power and influence because of the lack of queer representation in politics and arts growing up in Malaysia. I actually aspire to be one. I myself, I aspire to be someone who is in position of power and influence. I'm proactively trying to include community, proactively trying to create opportunities for new and emerging queer Asian artists to perform, to share their stories and amplify their voices.
I have many hopes and dreams for the future. Most of all, I would like to see trans children to be very normal within a family unit. I would like to see a few government ministers being trans. That'd be nice. I'd like to see some trans CEOs. I would like to see churches accept transgender children. Would really like to see trans people be like normalized.
It'd be really cool to have, like a prime minister who's like openly out, or, someone you always see in like a public role, like a chief health officer or an astronaut.
Australia's first trans lesbian given her own TV series. I've got ideas. Production companies, come talk to me.
My friend Mark Mariano said this in a panel once, and I really liked it. He said, I want to see a world where queer people and queer people of colour can be painfully average, and it's okay. We can make terrible rom-coms, we can make like terrible poetry, we can write shitty articles and make dumb reality TV, and no one bats an eyelid. So I want to get to the point where we've created so many things that it's okay to just make something shit.
I think sport's the last bastion, where actually the most macho of sports. I want to see a gay boxer. I want to see a gay football player that isn't Ian Roberts. I want to see someone who is there and is playing right now who says it's safe for me to be gay in public. And this country, the macho thing, needs to let go so it can actually free all men from that incredible limitation, I think.
I'm a huge AFL fan. I would love there to be like an out AFL player. Like, I feel like that's really missing, and like that's not even, my brand of queer, but I think that'd be so encouraging for so many people.
I would like to see it as normalised to the point where there's not a point made of it. It's like me being left-handed. Left-handed is probably about as common as being homosexual.
Oh, well, you know what my answer's going to be. More by men. More by women, by non-binary people, by trans people, being represented in all the different ways that they are, that show that there's not one way to be trans or non-binary or bi. There are so many different ways, and exploring the different relationships that we have. So not just monogamy, but also polyamory, to be able to see just the examples that we can take on board and understand, there are different ways to doing things to how we've been told.
I don't like all this splitting up over small things. Like, I don't split off from humanity because I'm left-handed or because I've got two eyes a different colour. We're just all a part of the same species, and we should all be able to have positions of power, regardless of our sexuality or colour or left-handedness.
The first queer Prime Minister is 2 elections away. Please, I'm speaking it into existence.